The wind that howled through the granite peaks didn't just carry the cutting cold of a coming Montana winter. It whispered the names of my 2 younger brothers, Caleb and Finn, names I had buried along with the best part of myself 6 years ago. I wasn't there when the raiders came, and that absence has been a ghost gnawing at my soul ever since. My homestead, tucked into Slatebox Canyon, wasn't a home. It was a fortress I'd built against the world, and more importantly, against my own memory. Every log was soaked in regret, and every dawn painted a sky as empty and indifferent as the space in my chest. That night, I was in Copper Bend, a town born from mud and greed, where men came to forget or to lose what little they had. I rarely came here, only when I had to. This time it was for a crate of tools I'd ordered. As I was preparing to leave, I heard shouts and laughter coming from behind the gambling hall, from the livestock barn, a place not meant for people, but one that often held the worst of them. Curiosity, a dangerous instinct, pulled me over. Inside, under the flickering light of lanterns, a crowd of sweating men circled a makeshift stage. The air was thick with the smell of manure, cheap whiskey, and cruelty, and on that stage, there she was. She stood there, her wrists bound in front of her with a rope that had rubbed her skin raw. Her buckskin dress was torn, a deliberate rip near the chest revealing the soft curve of her breast, a calculated display meant to incite base curiosity. A dark bruise spread across her ribs, another on her thigh, silent testaments to a fight. She kept her chin angled down, not in submission, but to avoid the hungry eyes that stripped her bare. I'd seen that stillness before, in wild horses about to break, a resilience born on the very edge of despair. The dealer, a man named Amos Glay with a garish vest and slicked back hair, circled her like a vulture.
"Guaranteed your money back if she doesn't satisfy you," he crowed, and the crowd answered with a chorus of vile laughter.
"Let's check the goods first," a man yelled. I stood in the shadows, telling myself to turn and walk away. This wasn't my fight. I had run from fights before, but then I saw her wrists, the bruise on her side, and the way she stood rigid but unbroken. And I remembered the night I came home to a burning homestead and the knowledge that I was too late. That same feeling of helpless rage, cold and sharp as a razor, rose in me. "How much?" My voice cut through the noise, low and clear. The barn fell silent. Every eye turned to me. Amos Glay squinted. He named an exorbitant figure, enough to buy a small herd of cattle, certain I would back down. I didn't say a word. I walked forward, pulled out a heavy leather pouch, and counted out the gold coins onto a wooden crate. The sound of them landing in the silence one by one was an indictment of every man in that room. Amos snatched the money, his swagger gone. "She's yours," he mumbled. I stepped onto the stage, drew my knife, and cut the rope. Her wrists were free, but she didn't move, her hands trembling. She didn't know if I was better or worse than the others. I didn't touch her. I just nodded towards the door and started walking. After a moment's hesitation, she followed. The cold night air was a slap in the face. I led her to my wagon. "Get in," I said. She looked at me, trying to read my face, but my face had been a closed book for a long time. She climbed into the back and sat, hugging herself. I took the driver's seat and flicked the reins, never looking back. As we left Copper Bend, the town's lights faded like dying embers. She didn't know where I was taking her. To be honest, neither did I. I just knew I couldn't leave her there. The ride was long and silent. The road was rough, and I could hear her quiet hiss of pain every time a wheel hit a rock, a sound that reminded me of her bruises. "How much farther?" she finally asked, her voice hoarse and weak. "A few more miles," I replied, my eyes fixed ahead. The silence returned, but something had shifted. She was a little less tense. She had asked a question, and I had answered. It was a start. "You got a wife out there?" she asked, another probing question. "No." When we arrived, my cabin appeared under the moonlight, a solitary structure of log and stone. I got down, unhitched the horse, and finally looked at her. "You can walk," I said. She nodded and climbed down, her bare feet flinching as they touched the frozen ground. Inside, I lit a lamp. The room was spare, a bed, a table, a stove. No woman's touch. I gave her a cup of water and she drank it slowly, her eyes never leaving me. "Why did you take me?" she asked. It took me a moment to answer. "I didn't want to leave you there." I pointed to the bed. "You sleep there tonight." I took a wool blanket from my trunk and spread it on the floor near the stove. She blinked, confusion plain on her face. "Men didn't give up their beds." "You're not asking for anything?" "No," I said, and started to rebuild the fire. I didn't understand my own actions. Maybe this wasn't about her. Maybe this was about Caleb and Finn. a chance, however late, to finally be there. That night I listened to the sound of her breathing, uneven at first, then finally deepening into sleep. And for the first time in years, the silence in my cabin didn't feel empty. It was filled with the presence of another living soul. Dawn arrived with a clean, cold light. I woke before her, but she was already sitting up in bed, the blanket wrapped around her. She hadn't run. I started the fire, made coffee. I set a cup on the table for her without a word. She took it, her fingers trembling slightly. "I can work," she said. "I don't take charity." I looked at her. "I'm not asking you to." "But I will," she said, a hint of defiance in her voice. "For my room and board." This was how she survived. Everything was a transaction, I nodded. There's wood to be split. The following days fell into a strange rhythm. Her name was Mara. She was a hard worker, never complaining. She split wood, hauled water, and cooked simple meals. We rarely spoke, but the silence between us began to change. It was no longer tense but companionable, like the quiet between two wild creatures who had learned to share the same territory. I found myself watching her. The way she moved, with a quiet grace despite her lingering pain. The way the sun caught her hair, making it shine with a reddish-brown light. The way she bit her lip when she was concentrating. I felt something stirring in me, a feeling I thought had long since died. And it terrified me. I started to push her away. I became gruff, more silent, finding every reason to stay outdoors until late at night. One evening, she confronted me. "Have I done something wrong, Mr. Tate?" "You shouldn't be here," I snapped. "It's not safe." "Nowhere is safe," she retorted, her voice sharp. "At least here there's a rifle within reach." The truth was, the danger wasn't from the outside. It was from me. I was afraid of the feeling she was awakening in me. To love was to have something to lose, and I had sworn never to lose again. But the outside world wouldn't leave us alone. One day, while mending a fence on the northern border, I found strange hoofprints, not from ordinary hunters. They moved with a purpose, and they weren't just passing through. They were scouting. I returned to the cabin with a sense of foreboding. I found Mara sitting on the porch, mending one of my torn shirts. She looked up as I approached, and for a moment she looked like a wife waiting for her husband. My heart clenched. "We have company," I said, "and I don't think they're here for coffee." That night we sat in the dark, each with a rifle. "Who are they?" she whispered. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I have a feeling they're not Amos Glay's men." The attack came just before dawn. There were 6 of them, moving fast and quiet, but I had set traps. Thin wires strung across the trail tied to small bells. The bells chimed and the fight began. Gunfire erupted. Mara fought beside me, unflinching. She fired with a calm, terrifying precision. We took down 2 of them before they knew what was happening, but the others were seasoned fighters. A bullet grazed my arm, searing hot. In the chaos, one of the attackers tried to circle around the back of the cabin. I didn't see him, but Mara did. She yelled a warning and fired. The man dropped. She had just saved my life. When the sun rose, the fight was over. 4 attackers were dead. 2 had fled. As we checked one of the bodies, I found something that made my blood run cold. A U.S. Marshal's badge, hidden in his coat pocket. "Dear God," I whispered. These weren't ordinary bandits. These were lawmen, or men pretending to be. A few days later, a man rode up to the homestead alone. He wasn't overtly armed, but he carried himself with an air of danger. He introduced himself as Marshal Clayton. "I'm looking for a woman, Tate," he said, his cold gray eyes boring into me. "She's a key witness. And a thief." Mara stepped out of the cabin to stand beside me. "I am not a thief." Clayton smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Oh no? What about the ledger you took from Senator Blackwood's office?" Senator Blackwood, a powerful name, a man whose influence spread across the territory. "That ledger contains proof," Mara said, her voice trembling with anger. "Proof that he ordered the raids on the homesteads, including Mr. Tate's 6 years ago, to seize the land for the railroad." The truth hit me like a physical blow. Caleb and Finn, they weren't victims of a random raid. They were murdered. And the man responsible for their deaths was using the law to hunt the woman I was protecting. "Get off my land," I growled, my hand on my Colt. Clayton shrugged. "I'll be back, Tate, with a company of men. Give her up and maybe the senator will be merciful." When he was gone, I turned to Mara. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I was afraid," she admitted. "I didn't know if you'd believe me, and I didn't want to reopen your wounds." I looked at her, this woman who had risked her life for me. This woman who had brought the painful truth to my doorstep. All the fear, all the distance I had tried to maintain, it all vanished. I stepped forward and pulled her into my arms. She was stiff for a moment. Then she sagged against me, her body shaking. "I believe you," I said, and the words were a vow. We knew we didn't have much time. Clayton would keep his word. We had to run, but where? "I know a place," Mara said, pulling an old leather amulet from her pocket. "My mother gave me this. She said it would lead us to the hidden valley." Inside the amulet was a crude map drawn on hide. It was a long shot, but it was the only one we had. We left that night taking only what we could carry. As we rode out of the canyon, I looked back at the cabin one last time. It was no longer a tomb. It had been a home, if only for a short while. Our journey was perilous. Clayton's men were relentless. A chase across the rugged mountains. In a shootout by a ravine, I saved Mara from a sniper. That night by the fire, the tension and fear gave way to something else. "I thought I would die alone, Elias," she whispered. "You're not alone anymore," I replied. I bent my head and kissed her. This time the kiss wasn't one of desperation, but of affirmation. An affirmation that even in the darkness we had found a light in each other. We finally found it. The hidden valley. A small paradise concealed behind a waterfall, where a small tribe of Shoshone lived in peace. They were Mara's mother's people. They welcomed us. There, we gave the ledger to a trusted journalist who ensured the truth about Senator Blackwood would come to light. Justice would be served, not by the gun, but by the truth. As winter passed and spring brought life back to the valley, Mara and I stood by a crystal-clear lake. "What will you do now?" she asked. "The truth about your brothers is out." I looked at her, the woman who had entered my life like a storm and had brought, in the end, a profound peace. "The past can't be changed," I said, "but the future can. My future is wherever you are, Mara." She smiled, a smile as bright as the spring sun. She stepped forward and put her hand in mine. "Then our future is here." I knew the road ahead would not be easy. The world outside the valley was still there, but for the first time in 6 years I was no longer afraid. I had faced my ghosts and found my salvation, not in solitude, but in the love of a woman who taught me how to live again. We had found our home, not on a piece of land, but in each other.